Hi, this is Julia with Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. And I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our next guest, Ashley. Ashley runs a podcast called Yoga Magic, and in that podcast, she explores self-care and the definition of self-care. I like to think of Yoga Magic as being very analogous to Stork'd, in the same way that Stork'd looks at the many different definitions of family and sort of dives into all the different aspects of family. Yoga Magic and Ashley dive into the definition of healing and self-care. And through the podcast, Ashley speaks to practitioners of every modality. She looks at the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, you name it, Yoga Magic explores it. So Ashley, in this way, really has a deep understanding of what self-care could be. And she talks to us in this episode about self-care and family building. And she'll tell us a little bit about her journey to step into becoming a parent, as well as how she relied on her self-care toolkit at a very difficult moment, which is following a miscarriage. I really appreciate Ashley's perspective around self-care. She talks about self-care as being all-encompassing, and it's that thing that just touches on every part of your life, including your family life. She also talks about how important it is as a parent to put your own seatbelt on first, so to speak, to make sure that you're taking care of yourself in order to best show up for those people that you love. And when Ashley and I first recorded this episode, I thought that that was a really nice theoretical concept. You know, really liked it from a that makes sense. I appreciate that perspective. But it wasn't until I became a parent when I actually experienced it firsthand, in that after moving back home from living with my parents for a period of time, I found myself so wrapped up in taking care of a newborn that I forgot to make sure that I was making myself nourishing meals and really taking care of the things that my body needed physically. And I found that after a few days of just running flat out, taking care of the baby, my milk supply absolutely tanked. And then I had to spend some time really working on paying attention to my nutrition, paying attention to my sleep where possible, and paying attention to some of those other elements that would make sure that I was best able to care for my child. So by literally not caring for myself, I was unable to care for him. And so Ashley's episode, now upon reflection and listening to it again and again, has different meaning for me. And I appreciate the toolkit that she brings to every experience, both as a mom and as an entrepreneur. This toolkit is especially important for Ashley as she explores grief. And we're going to talk a little bit about how she relied on her toolkit during a very difficult period of time in her life. I hope that you enjoy Ashley's episode as much as I enjoy creating and then now re-listening to it, because frankly, I've needed it recently. Here's Ashley. So welcome, Ashley, to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways people build and define family. I am so thrilled, having gotten to know you over the past year, to have you here in this format, in this capacity. And I'd like to welcome you to our audience. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks, Julia. I'm so excited to chat in this way. It's going to be really fun.
I agree. If you could start, Ashley, by telling us a little bit about yourself, introducing us as your audience to who you are.
Yes, of course. I'm Ashley Sondergaard. I am a mama of 2 little girls. I am the host of the podcast Yoga Magic, in which we talk about self-care and self-discovery. I'm a yoga teacher of 10 years, and I'm a self-care coach. I teach women to take care of themselves because, weirdly, it's very hard to do that.
It is. And what I love about your podcast is you've got so many really interesting topics that I might not have immediately bracketed in the context of self-care.
I just hit 100 today, so I'm celebrating a little bit.
Oh, congratulations. I feel honored to be celebrating with you on your anniversary of your 100th episode.
Yeah, thanks.
That's great. And so, you know, when we think about self-care, I really want to talk about self-care in the context of family life and family building as we continue our conversation. But to level set, what does self-care mean to you? When you think about that in the context of 100 episodes, 100 conversations, and dedicating your life to helping people discover this, what is it?
Yeah, self-care to me is being a full human. Really, you know, we hear that analogy so frequently of like, put on your life jacket before you put on your child's, or, you know, having a full cup. But truly, it's being so full that you have the energy and the space and the emotional capacity to care for other people. And I think that's the through line in all of my episodes, is that it's so important to come from a place of fullness and love when we are outpouring and giving to others, because so many others need it right now. And when we do that work and we work on ourselves and we fill our own cups up, people feel it. They experience it one-on-one. Children see it. They mimic that. And so it's self-care is community care.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the community we focus on here is families. And when I'm hearing this statement coming from a place of love, being so full, you're overcome with love, it sounds to me like there's so much richness with showing up fully and having that cup fully full. Tell us a little bit about how your self-care translates into your family life.
Yeah, I love that question. I've never had that question. Weirdly.
That's amazing. I mean, because you start with like, I am a mama, I am a mom of two, and then I focus on self-care in my profession. To me, they just go so naturally hand in hand.
It's funny you notice that, Julia, because I have been resistant to leading with I am a mom for so long. And I think it was just that I always wanted to present myself as such a professional. And for whatever reason, this is my own block, talking about my role as a parent, as a mother first, felt like in a way that was detracting from like this career that I'm working on. And I've really learned to like embrace them both. And it's felt really good. So like, thank you for noticing that.
Isn't it funny that we like start with this perspective that to be professional means that your job or your career or your profession trumps everything?
Oh, I think there's such just a blending of these areas. So, your question about how does self-care, really impact the family and my family specifically, it's been such a journey because I've been practicing yoga for 15 years. I learned about myself in yoga. It's going within, and it taught me so much about what it means to make decisions for myself, not for anyone else. And so over time, in yoga, I decided, hey, you know what? I actually really do want to have kids. I always thought that I just wouldn't, that wasn't in the cards. And when I made that decision, it felt so good. I want to create life, and I kind of want to have a lot of kids. What does that look like? And I made that decision. And when I first had my daughter, Lily, it was just a bit of a shell shock in terms of what it meant to actually still feel full, what it meant to take care of myself. And I had to learn. I remember kind of having this out of body experience, and breastfeeding was really challenging for me. And so when I was sitting, in the middle of the night, got baby in my arms, feeding her. And I just remember hovering over my body and looking at myself and saying you're not okay. You're not doing okay. You can let's take this back. And so starting to retrain myself into these tools that I had learned over time in yoga of self-discovery. For me, it was meditation. It was journaling. It was yoga. It was, actually nourishing my body rather than throwing stuff in my face. It's so fun because between Lily, my first, and then my daughter, Rory, I learned to step into that power and use it to create a life of just so much abundance. And so the tools that I learned while Lily was so little, I really put into practice when I was pregnant with Rory.
How do you think about self-care when things are not going well? When things don't follow the plan or they don't work out as intended, as visualized? Where does self-care fit in then?
Yeah. I know we're gonna talk about this a lot around loss. I experienced a miscarriage this year, and that was not planned, obviously. I have had the most beautiful pregnancies, and I never struggled to get pregnant. So this came as a very big surprise. And it was eye-opening for me because I had this toolkit of practices that I knew would hold me through challenging things. And so I didn't have to think about it a lot. And when I work with clients, I'm we prepare their emergency toolkit, their self-care toolkit. And I knew exactly what to do in that dark moment, probably the darkest I've ever experienced in my life, of going to the self-care practices that in the moment helped me get out of the low and into a little bit higher and eventually a little bit higher until I started to feel like myself again. So for me, it is meditation. In that time, it was extra rest. It was, napping. It was spending time with my two daughters. it was kind of blocking off my schedule. I went on a bougie trip until not everybody gets to do these things. I want to acknowledge that like I feel very privileged in this situation, but I was able to go to a resort and heal with a friend who had also been through this experience. So I felt so grateful that I had really kind of done this research and this legwork leading up to this time. We prepare ourselves with self-care. You know, it's an ongoing, it's a maintenance, but in the moment when you were like, I'm so foggy, I'm so sad that I don't even know where to go, I immediately was like, okay, this is what I do. And so it helped me, I think, heal quicker than perhaps if I didn't have those tools. Still healing, but definitely it helped.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear about that loss. And I do want to talk about that today in the context of family building and in your family life. I also want to compare and contrast all of that you just described, using these tools that you've been building over time to reach to at a moment of crisis, versus when you said you've had your first daughter and you noticed yourself hovering over your body saying something's not working. How have your self-care practices changed over time? And how has that helped with the two very different but challenging situations you've identified for us?
They change all the time. You know, I think I've become a lot more comfortable with self-care in a non-traditional sense now. Over time, I've really decided what I like, and I don't feel any even like mom guilt about it. You know, we experience that idea of like, oh, I should be with my kids, or I should be, you know, working or whatever, in a moment of like, actually, I really need to be with myself. And so over time, I've gotten so solid in knowing that this is critical to everyone else's well-being in my family that I feel zero guilt. Whereas early on in that first version of experiments and finding out what works for me, it was very much about kind of like soothing in the moment. Like it felt good, but I'd still have that distraction piece of like, okay, and now I just like need to make up for this and make sure that I'm like with my kids or my family or whatever. And now there's just that guilt really did melt away for me. And I think because I've seen the benefits of taking care of myself, I've seen that with my family. I see my daughter, Lily, the eldest, meditating in her room. You know, she sees me doing this. Cute. She journals before bed. And so now I see them doing this, and that shame and that guilt about like what I think I should be doing has melted away.
That's really interesting. So is self-care then the absence of shoulds or the absence of guilt? Is that really just the core of self-care?
I would love to say that. I would love that. I hope that everyone is working to the absence of shoulds. There is one caveat to that I would say, you know, people ask, but then what if I'm not doing any self-care? What if I'm shoulding about self-care at all? And it said, if you look at yourself and you think, gosh, you know what? I'm not even getting myself my basic needs. I'm not feeding myself properly. I'm not taking the sleep that I need. I'm not going to the bathroom when I have to go to the bathroom. That's when you bring in a little should. I should be going to the bathroom when I have to go to the bathroom.
And,
you know, set that baseline first. But outside of that, outside of your basic needs, there's no shoulding. It's about what feels good for you. It's listening to your intuition about what you need in that moment.
Okay, so we've been jumping around a little bit because it's such a fascinating and you said it, all-encompassing topic, this self-care. It reaches into every part of our lives. But let's go back to your journey. So you started by telling us about how you came to the realization that you wanted a family. Let's go back there. How did that realization come about for you?
I don't know why I was resistant to having children. I think partially I was pretty afraid. I was pretty afraid that I would fail at being a mother. My family life was lovely. It was so I mean, my parents are great. And, you know, we all have challenges just with relationships in general, but there was no reason for me to be afraid of being a mother. But I was really afraid. And I would speak in absolutes all the time. I'm never going to have kids. I'm never going to live in the suburbs. I'm never going to leave this job. I don't know. I think it was all very fear-based. And slowly over time, especially as I started to study yoga, not as just the practice, the physical practice, but as, the 8 limbs and all the other areas of yoga, I started to realize that oh, that's not actually who I am at all. I'm a Cancer sun. If you know anything about Cancers, we are like the mama bears. I'm the nurturer to the max. But I've never changed a diaper for a baby until my own children. Like I was not around kids. And so over time, once we'd made the decision to start a family and to have children and to get pregnant, that fear, even it started to melt away. And now I literally like, I could have so many kids if if it was in the blessings, I just love them so much. And I feel like I have so much love to give. So just doing the self-study work, that's what helped me get to where I am today.
Now, this is a really important distinction because I've had a lot of guests and a lot of friends and family members who say, I don't want kids. And some people will say, well, you're just afraid. You don't really know what you want. And here you're saying I had to uncover the fear. I had to address it head on and realize what needed to melt away from me and what was truly underneath the surface. How do you distinguish when you're initially resistant to something between what your soul is saying yes or no to and what may be fear-based?
It takes so much practice. I'm sure you do this too, Julia. Like getting in touch with your intuition. Like it is so hard.
Do you like how I just gave you that like hard question, but like nobody knows? But like in this case, you had to distinguish between this is fear versus this is actually what I don't want. And in other cases, somebody might choose the opposite. They might say, no, I really don't want kids, and has nothing to do with fear or whatever. And it's such a hard moment in life when you're faced with these big decisions to go like, what's really at play here? And here you're like, yeah, the yoga, I got it. I figured it out. It melted away. That sounds so big.
I think you're right. I think it was pretty huge. And I still, navigating intuition now, I'm working on it all the time. And for me, it's in meditation, but it's also learning where I experience intuition. For me, it's very much a feeling. It's a feeling like I don't know how to explain it because everyone has different ways that they experience this, but I feel almost like that butterfly sense when I'm on the right path. And I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know why, but I feel so connected and so expansive and just like excited. Intuition is so neutral. It's like excited, whereas fear is like, it can be paralyzing, as we're experiencing the last year and a half about like, where should I go? I'm afraid. I don't know what to do. So neutral helps when you can, for me anyways, that like intuition is relatively neutral.
Yeah. Okay. So you used your intuition to tap into what was true for you. It's not true for everyone, but what was true for you at the time, which is that fear was holding you back from a family that you actually really wanted. And then when you unleashed that fear and allowed yourself to step forward, it happened relatively quickly, is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm very grateful.
That's incredible. And you've talked about wanting lots and lots of kids, and you've had 2 beautiful daughters. And then you just started explaining this pretty painful experience that happened this year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm really open about this. I think it's such an interesting topic that everyone has a choice about whether or not they want to talk about something like miscarriage. For me, I'm always such an open book, and it helps to process externally. It helps to share in community with others that have experienced it. So when we decided earlier in the year that we wanted to have a third, it was just so exciting. We hadn't told our daughters that we were pregnant because it happened again very, very quickly. But we talked about, hey, do you girls want another sibling? Like, what do you think you want? Do you want a boy or a girl? Like, I'll see what I can do. And when we went in early on for the first ultrasound, everything was great. Nothing to be concerned about. There's a baby in there. It was all good. And not long after that, I started to experience just bleeding and, things that happen in pregnancies. Very normal. This had happened in other pregnancies for me. So I didn't think a whole lot about it, but it continued on for over a week. And so I called my midwives and they were like, this has been going on for a while. Let's get another ultrasound. I'm in the ultrasound room, and the sweet nurse is like, what did they tell you in your last ultrasound? I was like, what do you mean? What did they tell me? I was like, there's a baby in there? Is that? And so she turns the screen around and she shows me 2. There was 2 babies in there. Oh. And it was like, talk about like that overwhelming feeling. I felt blanketed in joy and just like could not believe it. I started shaking and I was like, oh my gosh. But even just a few seconds later, she said, but I'm sorry to tell you that one of them is no longer with us. There wasn't a heartbeat for one of them. And so it was just like this weird, I don't even know, like shell shock, like slap in the face, like so much joy and then so much sadness within a few seconds. I felt rocked, like I had run a marathon.
Oh.
And I was alone because we didn't think anything was wrong. And it was COVID. So like my partner couldn't come with. And so, yeah, I had to go back into a room, and knowing that there was still a baby in there, I wanted to hold it together and just like kind of process, but like, okay, this is going to be part of the journey, and call my dad and, cried with him. And it was really hard, but there was still this like glimmer of hope through it. And the midwife came in and she said, yeah, I'm so sorry that you lost one. Something called vanishing twin. It happens a lot. Mm-hmm. And she didn't say a whole lot about the other baby. She just said that the heart rate was pretty low, and that, I should come back in a week or so to check it again. And in that moment, I didn't think a whole lot about it. I even asked her, like, so is this a high risk pregnancy? And she was like, pause. Yes. And she could have said, it looks like you're going to miscarry the other as well. But she didn't. She gave me the space, and I'm grateful that she did, because I think it would have been too much in that moment.
Too much
but
grief.
I got home, just too much. Yeah. I got home and I looked up what the heart rate should be. And I looked up what the heart rate of the baby that was still with us was. And it was so low that I realized, like, okay, yeah, this isn't probably going to happen for me. And so,
did you know in that moment, like, was Dr. Google helpful in getting you mentally prepared for this? Or
yes,
were you holding on to hope? What did that moment look like when you're staring at the computer screen and realizing that the statistics are not maybe in your favor?
It did help. I'm a planner. So just like having that extra space, really some time to process. And, I looked at it, I was with my partner, and we're like watching TV, and we're processing the loss of baby already. And now we're thinking about, like, okay, this is a realistic experience here that we're probably going to lose the other. And so it helped me. It helped me prepare. I can't say that I wasn't hopeful. I was so hopeful in that whole week. And when I went in this time, my partner was able to go with me for, a week later to check on the other baby. She confirmed that we lost that one too. And I knew that would be the case. I wasn't surprised. It just still was just really hard and really, really, I've never experienced anything like this in my whole life. Like I've had a really beautiful life. I mean, I lost, grandparents and things, but nothing like this, where it felt, I just felt like such a melancholy and low grade sadness that immediately settled in and didn't go away for some time. I talk a lot about spirituality, and this is really what helped me throughout this journey, is like understanding what their purpose was, if there was a purpose to be with me. But I think that they were meant to be together. Their heartbeats stopped within a couple days of each other. So they were very much with each other throughout that process. And I think that felt good to know that they were together. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
something to hold on to. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so how does somebody who is so well versed in self-care and so well versed in your intuition and what you need to heal anything, how does somebody like that face loss?
When I look back at that time, it was so foggy. It was so dark. It was just so, I didn't want to get out of bed, and I've never experienced that in my whole life. I'm like one of the most energetic people ever, and I love everything about my life. So it was like, this was so new. Like that was a weird piece that I didn't expect, like the newness of grief, of what it actually feels like in my body and my emotions. Like I just first had to understand, to process what grief felt like. And then I immediately started talking about it. I have a therapist, talked with my therapist. I talked with friends. And then I ultimately had a D&C at 11 weeks. I was hoping that they would pass, but they didn't, which is something often people don't even know about. It's called a missed miscarriage.
And can you explain, some of our audience members may not be as aware of what happens physically or physiologically after a baby is no longer viable.
Mm-hmm. I had no idea what this was until I'd experienced it either. So when we saw that the heart rates weren't there anymore, you anticipate that the body will naturally just process and that the babies will pass on their own. And I was hoping for that. The midwives were very gentle with me, but I don't feel that they like fully gave me the information about what the options were and like how different they all are. So the first being let it happen on its own. The second being you can take something that, to kind of ignite that passing of the tissue. And then the third being a DNC, which is, a surgery. It's a minor surgery, but it is a surgery. And so they laid these all out. It was like, okay, they're all sort of equal in weight. And I didn't think that they were, having gone through the process in the end. And so I was hoping that it would happen on its own. We went out to my in-laws in Arizona to just like rest and like get some help with the kids so I could have it happen. And it didn't. And I was so sick because with twins, it was like so much pregnancy hormone that my body was completely overwhelmed and I was throwing up. And at this point, I'm not even pregnant anymore, right? Like they're not even there. Heartbeats aren't even there. And I'm still like so sick. I was so additionally saddened that I felt so unwell and that it wasn't happening on its own. And that added so much additional grief that after, the baby's heartbeat stopped at 8 weeks. I found out fully at 9 weeks and I waited 2 additional weeks before we had a surgery. And so did the DNC, which is a swift surgery. But I think for someone who's never had a surgery, I was like, oh, wow, like the OR, that's a scary place. Never been there before.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just any surgery. It's a surgery to remove something that you had wanted. It's a removal of hope and loss of viability and loss of this very real thing that had previously existed.
And, I'd been really pretty okay in that week leading up to the DNC and after the actual procedure came out and just was, the release was very palpable. I could feel it. I just felt sad, but also relieved at the same time because my body was just so sick that, there were a lot of emotion coming out of that.
Yeah, it's as I understand it, one of the things that is also happening to your body is this huge release of hormones. And so the sudden loss of all the hormones that have been building up in your system can be very palpable and very painful emotionally. Did you experience that?
I asked the OBGYN that did the surgery, I asked her, do women get like postpartum depression coming out of a DNC? And she was like, no one's ever asked me that. I was shocked. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, you think about the hormones coming down. She said, you can definitely experience depression for a variety of reasons, and hormones being one of them. And what's really interesting too, Julia, is that I treated my body like I had postpartum with my other 2 pregnancies. So I nourished it in the same ways. I had a number of friends that like brought over, there's a local company that does like pre-made postpartum meals, like as if you are going to be breastfeeding. They're full of all these, good nutrients and things. And I treated my body in that way. I just felt like that was something I wanted to do. I rested and I didn't have to. It's not a big surgery or anything, but like, again, like my body felt postpartum for at least a month. And then, I actually was really glad to have that space and time.
I love that as a way of thinking about something traumatic, as giving yourself space, as reaching out to 2 very interesting resources. I heard you say your friends, and then this place that has wonderful food and nourishing food. It's such an interesting idea that when we're going through something rough, not to push past and just say, I'm okay, but to like just sit in it a little bit and to create space for it. Is that sort of what I'm hearing you recommend?
Yeah. Your question earlier about like, what does someone who's versed in self-care, where do they go and what do they do? And for me, it was space. It was slow. It was just feminine energy of receiving that healing and letting people send me things. This is funny. I'm a Leo, Venus and Leo. So I love gifts. I really do. And like people sent me so many nice things and I loved it and I received it. And
I love that you're able to admit that, right? Like, I think many of us secretly love gifts, but we're like, oh, I've got a gift, But I love that you're just putting it out there like, yep, give me something special. Makes me feel so loved.
Good. Yeah. Things like, like bath salts and stuff, just that like you're in this moment. And now it makes me that much more inclined to just give really meaningful gifts too, because I appreciate them so much. But yeah, I was able to take some time from work too. With that time is that I was continuing to fill my cup, taking more time, doing different things so that I could continue to be there for Lily and Rory and my partner and just really still be as full of a human in that scenario as I could. And I told the girls repeatedly, Mommy's really sad. Like, I wanted them to know that it's okay to be sad. They didn't know, the details, but yeah, they needed to know that, like, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry and move through emotions when hard things happen. But still, I was there for them in every way that I could possibly be throughout that process.
How has going through this process changed your relationship to your daughters, or has it?
I wish I could say that it was all really positive in terms of how the relationship has changed. I've noticed, and I imagine this is just part of the whole grieving process, my anxiety has gotten a lot higher about worrying about them. I hold on to them that much tighter. I will creep into their room at night and just stare at them. And I don't know if someone shared this with me once, that when you're pregnant, you expand, like your heart expands. And for me, when I lost the babies, that love didn't go somewhere else, right? I still expanded and I grew in this way, and I needed to give it somewhere else. And I feel like that has definitely gone into my two children. And sometimes it shows up as worry right now. I just am wanting to hold on to them that much tighter. But yeah, I've never been overly afraid of things with them. And now I'm starting to see that creep in. So I'm, working with my therapist on that.
I like the way you just described your heart expanding. Right now, I've experienced it in other places too, not just with pregnancy, but when you meet a friend that is just a soulmate friend and you can just feel yourself, you can literally feel your heart growing. Or, in partnership, when you've got all the love hormones in a new relationship, you can feel yourself growing. So I like that moment of identifying the physical and emotional expansion. But then you're right. Where does it all go? Where do you put all that energy?
Yeah. And, I'd done some meditation we're talking about like the purpose of those souls visiting me and being there with me. And I really do feel that they brought me gifts. I do, again, because I love gifts. But they...
wait, are these like spiritual gifts, emotional gifts? Tell us what kind of gifts might have come from a very traumatic experience.
Yes, happy to. So before I even found out I was pregnant, I was in meditation and I kept getting this name coming in, and the name was Celia. And I was like, kept hearing it in this meditation. And I, once I finished, I came out, I was like, I wonder what that means. I looked it up and it means heaven. And so I was like, oh, well, we're going to name the baby Celia, Cece. This is going to be so great. I'd actually done a DNA test the day before. There's something called, Sneak Peek, where you can take a blood test, send it in, and then the next day you get it back. And it'll get an email that says the gender. And the gender that we had was a boy. And, the next day, knowing that there were twins, we knew that there could have been a boy and a girl, or two boys. And so in my mind, it was a boy and a girl. And I'd always had the name Leo picked out for a boy. Mm-hmm. I think of like the Leo energy, like Leo, the sign, and just like bright and shiny and sun ruled, and just like all of the abundance energy, creative.
I like the combo of sun energy and heaven energy,
right?
Those two dualities are really nice.
Yeah. So when I was in meditation after, all of a sudden started to think about these gifts that Celia and Leo had brought me and how different they were. And Celia being this insight to the divine and heaven and God. And with Leo, it was this spark of creativity and this drive and this vigor and just being like boss energy. Like Leo energy is boss energy. And so they brought me these gifts, and I really just wanted to embrace them in that way and recognize them. And now when I'm, doing the work that I'm doing, or I'm spending time with my family, I think about them a lot. I think about these souls, whether they were just visiting me and they'll maybe come back, but like what they were able to bring me. Because I don't know if you believe this, but I believe that the children's souls choose their parents.
So you think that these two beings chose to be with you for 8 weeks in order to leave these gifts?
I hope that's what they were doing. I do believe that. I don't know. I'm also hopeful that I'll get to experience them again sometime.
It's a really sweet idea So let's go back to the gifts thing. We're talking about the gifts that the babies have given you. We've talked about gifts that your friends gave you. When supporting somebody who is going through this, having gone through it yourself, what's the best way to show up as a friend, a colleague, or somebody who cares?
No, I had so many different versions of support, and I was so appreciative of that. It might help to give some ideas about maybe what not to do, as we've seen.
Yes, that would be really helpful. Because I think so many of us are afraid, for starters, we've talked about fear quite a bit in this conversation, but, for starters, there may be fear to disclose on the part of the person who's going through the painful experience, who's going through the loss and the grief. If you do feel inclined to communicate it to others in the way that you did, those people receiving that information, and this has happened to me on occasion as well, is like, you just don't know how to be of support. It can be really scary that you might say or do the wrong thing or misstep and make the pain worse.
Yeah, I agree. And I think of this in this area too, where someone is experiencing something really hard, it's better to say something than to not. I really appreciated when people reached out. Where it got hard is there's a difference between someone saying, hey, like, I'm so sad this happened to you. I'm sending you all the love. I've experienced this as well. I'm sending you support. Like, love that. Thank you so much. There's a difference between that versus somebody that is making it their pain. And I experience that more in sort of like a family dynamic, and that people sometimes just like to make things about them.
That is so true. Well, let's just say that again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not about you.
And that's, they've got their own stuff. But in the moment, I was like, okay, like, I know this person is going through something themselves, and this is just how they communicate. But it added this like extra layer of annoyance and kind of like just frustration when people make it about them. It was just more like, oh, this is my pain. I'm so sad. Well, like, great. I'm sure you are. And share that with somebody else, not with me, because I'm sad too. I know, I know that. That would be like the only experience where I wasn't super joyful about what they had to share. But for the most part, people were just so kind. And because I was so open about it, I had tons of people that would message me, and I felt very supported, and I hope I was able to support them too, in just knowing that they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting when somebody unknowingly puts it on you to comfort them. And you're like, wait a minute, where's my support? Like, why am I doing this on your behalf? And it's not about your space. It's about you holding space for other people, even when you're grieving yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's, being a teacher, being a yoga teacher, being a healer, holding space takes energy. It takes, mental capacity. Yeah, it's real.
Yeah. How has this experience shaped the way you think about family and your family life in general? Does it inform what you hope and plan for the future? Does it inform your definition of family? How does it reshape your self-identity in terms of your family life?
There's a lot that we've learned since we lost the babies. And I'll just first speak to our family, but also like when I think about family, what I've learned through this whole experience. So first we learned that the babies had Down syndrome, and we'd had some indications of that, even with other pregnancies, with my other 2 pregnancies, that could be potential. I don't know what this all means. We haven't really even like worked with a genetic counselor yet, but it does seem like this might not be in the cards for me to have a lot more kids. And then I'm sad about that, but I understand. And I feel so, so grateful to have 2 healthy little girls. So I don't know. It's still very unknown. And I feel, talking about like having that joy of wanting to have all these kids, and all of a sudden, potentially not being able to do that is just new information. I'm really learning to accept it. An amazing friend shared with me that she said, it's easier to decide you want to have a family and start having kids than it is to decide when to stop. It's hard to know when. When do we stop?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful?
How are you going to decide? Like, how are you and your partner going to make that call?
I don't know yet. We're going to meet with a counselor. There's so much to fertility, and I'm 35, but doing some of the research into like, how viable are my eggs at this? This whole journey, there's so much nuance to it. I'm really open to all the possibilities. And also if it's just not in the cards, I feel okay with that too. So I'm really open to that. And I think the other piece of it is that I just think it's such a miracle to have babies. I look at my kids and I'm like, wow, they're miracles. And I love the magic in all of these experiences, the magic in our life. I mean, that's so much we talk about on my show. It's like there's so much magic in our lives. And I think we as women, we are the catalyst for that magic.
I love those words that you're using: magic, miracles, magnificence. I mean, you talked about stepping into your power, but this is what you're saying. These are power words. That's really intense and beautiful and raw. I thank you for framing it like that for us.
Thank you for going down this journey and opening this up, because there's so much magic in all of these forms of family. It's not just 2 kids and a husband and a dog. It's so much more.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. And it's so much more complex than that. You may see at the surface 2 kids and 2 vibrant, healthy, happy kids and not know that there's other things that have happened along the journey for somebody, even if your family life does look more traditional. And I think that's an important thing that you're highlighting for us today.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a hard question, and you don't have to answer this, but had one or both of the babies survived and had been confirmed with a Down syndrome diagnosis, how might that have shaped your family life? How might you have faced that decision?
I've sadly had the chance to think about this a lot, because with Lily, they did genetic testing early on, and there were a lot of markers that she could potentially be a Down syndrome diagnosis as well. So for us, we just have such a blessed life that I felt like, again, like this soul chose us to be able to do it. Would it be hard? Yes. But they even early on in genetic testing, they'll ask you, do you want to do an amniocentesis right now? And I know that there's risk around that. And I'm like, this isn't going to change anything. Even if you give us an outcome of something that would be really hard, like Down syndrome, it is what it is. I would double down on the self-care for sure. But I would
circle, yeah.
Right. But my husband and I talked about that a lot.
Yeah, it goes back to your definition of self-care is showing up for yourself so you can show up for others. And this is a very big way in which to show up. Yeah. Well, I want to ask you one final question before we wrap up. We have explored this from a couple of different angles, but I want to ask it to you as directly as possible. And that is, how do you personally define family?
Family is love. It's abundance. It's feeling supported and complete throughout the hard things, the easy and the hard. Mm-hmm. It's that feeling that you're not alone and that we are really connected. And again, this through line of love, and talked about abundance. Abundance isn't, you can't touch it. You can't like talk to it. It's around you. It's a feeling. It's an idea. And family, whatever form or shape it takes, it's all of those things. And family will be there when you're in that melancholy and you can't get out of bed. They'll always be there.
That's wonderful. What's so interesting is that you started this conversation and you said, self-care is about love, and it's about being so full of self-love that it just spills out. Your cup is full and you can give love to everyone around you. And it's like, having spent an hour with you chit-chatting, I feel so overcome with the feelings of joy, magnificence, warmth, and love. And that's amazing that you can translate that through a microphone.
I'm so glad, Julia. You're doing so much amazing work. And I'm so excited for you.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Before I let you go, we need to know where to find you. All these words of wisdom, they're available online and through podcasts. How does one access those?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Julia. I love being around you. And I love your podcasts. And I'm so glad that we were connected earlier this year. You can find me a couple different ways. You can check out the podcast. It's called Yoga Magic. And again, we talk about self-care, self-discovery, lots of different tools and spirituality. It's out a little bit out there. I love it. And then you can find me on Instagram at ashleysondergaard.yoga. And I love to do workshops around cosmic self-care. We look at astrology. I teach some fun classes and workshops and all sorts of things. So hop on over to my website, which is my name, or Instagram, and I'd love to connect. And if you've been through this, send me a DM if you need any support. I'm always here to listen and share if you need that.
That's such a generous offer. Thank you for giving that gift to anyone who's listening to us today. Highly recommend checking out her podcast. And you're really good at the Instagram reels. They're like so entertaining and so helpful and all that good stuff. So check her out. And thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.
Hello, Stork'd family. Did you know that the FDA does not require tampon brands to provide a full list of ingredients on their boxes? Yeah, seriously. That's why so many of the big names use the disclaimer, may contain, before they list all these synthetic ingredients like rayon, polyester, and fragrance. It's time you meet Lola. They're always up front, even on the back of the box. Founded by women with sky-high standards who think that what they put on and in our bodies matters. Lola offers period, sexual wellness, and vaginal health essentials made with high-quality, natural ingredients. Gynecologist-approved, clean products that are by your side during every stage of your life. Find exactly what you need at mylola.com, Amazon, Walmart, and select retailers nationwide.